Hi everyone and welcome to another part of Capablanca's Chess Fundamentals. The customary quote, what you think you become, what you feel you attract, what you imagine you create. From the spiritual leader, Buddha. A brief review of the last part where we concluded chapter 6 and with it part 1 of the book after discussing the topics, some possible developments from Marie Lopez and the influence of a whole. Later, we begin part 2 of the book Illustrative Games and went through game 1 in it. So now, moving further, Kappa discusses game number 2 of the Illustrative Games section of the book. He writes, Game 2, Queen's Gambit declined, San Sebastian 1911. White, A.K. Rubinstein. Black, J.R. Capablanca. d4, d5, knight f3, c5, c4, e6, c takes d5, e takes d5, knight c3, knight c6, g3 and bishop e6. Knight f6 is the normal move in this variation. White's development was first introduced by Schlechter and elaborated later on by Rubinstein. It aims at the isolation of Black's d-pawn, against which the white pieces are gradually concentrated. In making the text move bishop e6, I was trying to avoid the beaten track. Being a developing move, there should be no objection to it in the way of general principles, except that the knights ought to come out before the bishops. Bishop g2, bishop e7, castles and rook c8. In pursuance of the idea of changing the normal course of this variation, but with very poor success. The move in theory ought to be unsound, since Black's king's knight is yet undeveloped. I had not yet learned of the attack founded on knight g5 and the exchange of the bishop at e6. Either knight f6 or h6 to prevent either bishop g5 or knight g5 was right. So rook c8, d takes c5, bishop takes c5, knight g5, knight f6, knight takes e6, f takes e6, bishop h3, queen e7, bishop g5 and castles. This was a mistake. The right move was rook d8 in order to get the rook away from the line of the bishop at h3 and at the same time to support the d-pawn. Incidentally, it shows that white failed to take proper advantage of Black's weak opening moves. Against the text move castles, white makes a very fine combination which I had seen, but which I thought could be defeated. Bishop takes f6 and queen takes f6. I considered g takes f6, which it seemed would give me a playable game, but I thought white's combination unsound and therefore let him play it, to my lasting regret. So queen takes f6, knight takes d5, queen h6 and king g2. This is the move which I had not considered. I thought that Rubinstein would have to play bishop g2, when I had in mind the following winning combination: knight e5 and knight f4. If rook c1, queen takes c1, double exclamation mark. Queen takes c1 and bishop takes f2 check wins for Black. So knight f4, knight g4 and h3. If knight h3, bishop takes f2 check wins the exchange. So h3, knight takes f2, rook takes f2, bishop takes f2 check, king takes f2, g5, and black should win. It is curious that this combination has been overlooked. It has been taken for granted that I did not see the 17th move, queen c1 by white. So king g2 and rook d8. After white's last move, there was nothing for me to do but submit to the inevitable. Queen c1, e takes d5, queen takes c5, rook, queen d2, queen b5, knight d4, queen d3, queen takes d3, e takes d3, rook e8 and bishop g4. This gives black a chance. He should have played rook e1. If then knight c2, rook takes c8 check, rook takes c8, rook c1, rook e2, king f1 and knight d4. If rook d2, bishop e6 check, king f8 and bishop takes d5 would win. So knight d4, rook c8 check, king f7, rook c7 check, rook e7 and rook c5 wins. But bishop g4 was played by white in the game, and play continued with rook d6, rook e1, rook takes e1, rook takes e1, rook b6, rook e5, rook takes b2, rook takes d5, knight c6, bishop e6 check, king f8, rook f5 check, king e8, bishop f7 check, king d7, bishop c4 and a6. A bad move which gives away any legitimate chance black had to draw. It loses a very important move. In fact, as the course of the game will show, it loses several moves. The proper way was to play king d6. If then rook b5, rook takes b5, bishop takes b5, knight d4, followed by b5, and white would have an exceedingly difficult game to draw on account of the dominating position of the knight at d4 in conjunction with the extra black pawn on the queen side and the awkward position of white's king. See how this is so. So a6, rook f7 check, king d6, rook takes g7, e5, bishop g8, a5, rook takes h7, a4, h4, b4, rook h6 check, king c5, rook h5 check, king b6 and bishop d5. With these last three moves, white again gives black a chance. Even before the last move, bishop c4 would have won with comparative ease. But the text move, bishop d5, is a downright blunder, of which, fortunately for him, black does not avail himself. b3. Rook takes a2 would make it practically impossible for white to win, if he can win at all. White's best continuation would then have been bishop c4, rook c2, rook b5 check, king c7, bishop g8, a3, h5, a2, bishop takes a2, rook takes a2, and if there is a win, it is very difficult to find, as against h6, rook a6 offers excellent chances for a draw. So b3, a takes b3, a3, bishop takes c6, and rook takes b3. If a2, rook b5 check, king a6, and rook b8. So rook takes b3, bishop d5, a2, and rook h6 check, where black resigned the game. As an endgame, this is rather a sad exhibition for two masters. The redeeming feature of the game is Rubinstein's fine combination in the middle game, with bishop takes f6 on the 14th move. Moving further, Kappa discusses game number 3 of the illustrative game section of the book. He writes, Game 3, Irregular Defense, Havana 1913. White D. JANOWSKI, Black J.R. Capablanca. b4, knight f6, knight f3, d6, bishop g5, knight d7, e3, e5, knight c3, c6, bishop d3, bishop e7, queen e2, queen a5, castles, knight f8, rook d1, and bishop g4. At last, black is on his way to obtain full development. The idea of this irregular opening is mainly to throw white on his own resources. At the time the game was played, the system of defense was not as well known as the regular forms of the queen-pawn openings. Whether it is sound or not remains yet to be proved. Its good features are that it keeps the center intact without creating any particular weakness, and that it gives plenty of opportunity for deep and concealed maneuvering. The drawback is the long time it takes black to develop his game. It is natural to suppose that white will employ that time to prepare a well-conceived attack, or that he will use the advantage of his development actually to prevent black's complete development, or failing that to obtain some definite material advantage. h3, bishop h5, d takes e5, d takes e5, knight e4, and knight takes e4. A very serious mistake. I considered castling, which was the right move, but desisted because I was afraid that by playing bishop takes f6, g takes f6, knight g3, bishop g6, and knight f5, white would obtain a winning position for the endgame. Whether right or wrong, this shows how closely related are all parts of the game, and consequently how one will influence the other. So knight takes e4, bishop takes e7, king takes e7, bishop takes e4, and bishop g6. Not good. The natural and proper move would have been knight e6 in order to bring all the black pieces into play. Bishop takes f3 at once was also good, as it would have relieved the pressure against black's e-pawn and at the same time have simplified the game. Here it is seen how failure to comply with the elementary logical reasons that govern any given position often brings the player into trouble. I was no doubt influenced in my choice of moves by the fear of bishop f5, which was a very threatening move. So bishop g6, queen c4, knight e6, b4, queen c7, bishop takes g6, h takes g6, queen e4, king f6, and rook d3. h4 to be followed by g4 might have been a more vigorous way to carry on the attack. Black's weak point is unquestionably the pawn at e5, which he is compelled to defend with the king. The text move rook d3 aims at doubling the rooks, with the ultimate object of placing one of them at d6. Supported by a pawn at c5. Black could only stop this by playing c5, which would create a hole at d5, or by playing b6, which would tie the black queen to the defense of the c-pawn, as well as the e-pawn, which she already defends. Black, however, can meet all of this by offering the exchange of rooks, which destroys white's plans. For this reason, h4 appears the proper way to carry on the attack. So rook d3, rook d8, rook d1, and g5. The move is preparatory to g6, which would make black's position secure. Unfortunately for black, he did not carry out his original plan. c4, and rook takes d3. g6 would have left black with a perfectly safe game. So rook takes d3, rook takes d3, and rook d8. A very serious mistake which loses a pawn. g6 was the right move and would have left black with a very good game. In fact, if it should come to a simple ending, the position of the black king would be an advantage. So rook d8, rook takes d8, knight takes d8, and h4. This wins a pawn and will soon be seen. Black cannot reply knight e6 because h takes g5 check. Knight takes g5 and queen h4 wins the knight. So h4, g takes h4, queen takes h4 check, king e6, queen g4 check, king f6, queen g5 check, king e6, queen takes g7, queen d6, c5, queen d5, e4, queen d1 check, king h2, f6, queen g4 check, king e7, knight takes e5, queen takes g4, knight takes g4, knight e6, e5, f takes e5, knight takes e5, and knight d4. The game went on for a few more moves, and there being no way to counteract the advance of white's two passed pawns, black eventually resigned. Moving further, Kappa discusses game number 4 of the illustrative games section of the book. He writes, Game 4, French Defense, St. Petersburg, 1913. White, J.R. Capablanca, Black, E.A. SNOSKO-BOROVSKI. D4, E6, E4, D5, Knight C3, Knight F6, bishop g5 and bishop b4. This constitutes the McCutcheon variation. It aims at taking the initiative away from white. Instead of defending, black makes a counter demonstration on the queen side. It leads to highly interesting games. E takes d5. At the time this game was played, the variation e5 was in vogue or popular. But I considered then, as I do now, the text move e takes d5 to be the stronger. Queen takes d5. This is considered superior to e takes d5. It has for its object, as I said before, to take away the initiative from white by disrupting white's queen side. White, however, has more than ample compensation through his breaking up black's king side. It might be laid down as a principle of the opening that the breaking up of the king side is of more importance than a similar occurrence on the queen side. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes c3 check, b takes c3, g takes f6, knight f3 and b6. The plan of black in this variation is to post his bishop on the long diagonal, as to be able later on, in conjunction with the action of his rooks along the open g file, to make a violent attack against white's king. It is of course expected that white will castle on the king side because of the broken up condition of his queen side pawns. Queen d2, bishop b7, bishop e2, knight d7, c4, queen f5 and castles long. An original idea, I believe, played for the first time in a similar position in a game against Mr. Walter Penn Shipley of Philadelphia. My idea is that as there is no black bishop, and because black's pieces have been developed with a view to an attack on the king's side, it will be impossible for black to take advantage of the apparently unprotected position of white's king. Two possibilities must be considered. Firstly, if black castles on the queen side, as in this game, it is evident that there is no danger of an attack. Secondly, if black castles on the king side, white begins the attack first, taking advantage of the awkward position of black's queen. In addition to the attacking probabilities of the text move, castles long, white in one move brings his king into safety and brings one of his rooks into play. Thus he gains several moves, tempi as they are called, which will serve him to develop whatever plan he may wish to evolve. Castles long, queen e3, rook g8, g3 and queen a5. Unquestionably a mistake, overlooking white's fine reply, but a careful examination will show that white already has the better position. Rook d3, king b8, rook d1, queen f5 and knight h4. This move has been criticized because it puts the knight out of the way for a few moves. But by forcing queen g5, white gains a very important move with f4, which not only consolidates his position but also drives the queen away, putting it out of the way for the moment. Certainly the queen is far more valuable than the knight, to say nothing of the time gained and the freedom of action obtained thereby for white's more important pieces. Queen g7 and bishop f3. In such positions, it is generally very advantageous to get rid of the black bishop controlling a6 and c6, which forms holes for white's pieces. The bishop in such positions is of great defensive value, hence the advantage of getting rid of it. Rook e8, bishop takes b7, king takes b7, c5 and c6. White threatened c6 check. So c6, knight f3 and queen f8 to prevent the knight from moving to d6 via d2 and e4 or c4. It is self-evident that white has a great advantage of position. Knight d2 question mark. I had considered rook b3, which was the right move, but gave it up because it seemed too slow, and that in such a position there had to be some quicker way of winning. So knight d2, b takes c5 and knight c4. Knight e4 or knight b3 would have brought about an ending advantages to white. So knight c4, knight b6, knight a5 check, king a8, d takes c5, knight d5, queen d4 and rook c8. If rook b8, knight takes c6, rook c8 and knight a7, knight takes a7 would win for white. So rook c8 and c4. Knight c4 was the right move. I was, however, still looking for the grand combination and thought that the pawn I would later on have at d6 would win the game. Black deserves credit for the way in which he conducted this exceedingly difficult defense. He could easily have gone wrong any number of times, but from move 22 onwards, he always played the best move. So c4, e5, queen g1, e4, c takes d5, e takes d3, d6, rook e2, d7, rook c2 check, king b1, rook b8 check, knight b3, queen e7 and rook takes d3. The position is most interesting. I believe I lost my chance to win the game, but if that is true, it would vindicate my judgment when, on move 28, I played c4. The student can find out what would happen if white plays queen d4 at once instead of rook takes d3. I have gone over the following variations. Queen d4, rook takes h2. Of course, if rook takes c5, d8 queen wins. So rook takes h2, queen takes d3, rook d8, queen a6 and king b8 best. If queen e4 check, king a1, king b8 and rook b1 wins. So king b8, queen takes c6 and white will at least have a draw. However, rook takes d3 was played in the game and play continued with rook e2, queen d4, rook d8, queen a4, queen e4, queen a6, and king b8. There is nothing to be done against this simple move, since white cannot play knight d4 because queen h1 mates. King c1, rook takes d7, knight d4, and rook e1 check, where white resigned the game. A very interesting battle. Alright, we conclude this part of Capablanca's chess fundamentals here, and we shall continue onwards from the next one. Here is a look at the recent channel support. Several new supporters: Tachikooma, California Dreamin', Gaseous Clay, Famutron, Incognito Burrito, Sheldor, FB3, Crazy Cat, and crazylikefoxnews. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Till next time, take care.